All right, all right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Coffee with the Founder. I got my coffee cup here. Got my coffee, and of course, I got another phenomenal guest, a colleague, a friend, a true brother, uh, uh, Sherard Robbins, hanging out in the AZ. My brother. Listen, we're putting these coffee talks together as a way to introduce people to the WPC family, the folks that are connected to us, that are doing great work, just so people can know them beyond the conference experience. And so we're glad that you could come on and share a little bit about you and your work. Let's start by you introducing yourself. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm happy we're able to find a time that works for us to make sure we can engage and chat. So I'm Sherard Robbins. I oversee an LLC, which is an organizational development consultancy. Right here in Tucson, Arizona is where we're based, but we work nationally and internationally. And so what we try to do is help different organizations and institutions, large, small, nonprofit, what have you, find ways to center their programmatic efforts around diversity and inclusion. So that means working with mission statements, vision statements, ideas about how to diversify your hiring, really anything that has to do with moving from diversity to equity in the most sustainable and effective way. And so we've been able to engage some of the different philosophies out there and different research and theorists and educators who kind of paved the way, such as yourself, to kind of lean on for guidance in critical ways of looking at the conversation.
Yeah, I want to ask you about how you define diversity, inclusion, equity, just because, those words can mean so many different things for different people. But before that, let me ask you, how did you get here? Did you grow up thinking, hey, I'm going to be the owner of my LLC, changing not only the nation, organizations, but the world? So how did you get to this point?
That's a good question. Yeah. Well, it wasn't necessarily that. I started out like many young brothers in the world of athletics. I came up through basketball, played all the way through semi-pro. But when I was in my mid-20s, I went to graduate school, got my master's degree, and that's kind of what opened my eyes to the academic side of what I was experiencing in life. I kind of didn't have language for some of the racism I experienced or some of the discrimination, and that really helped turn the table for me. And since then, it's been about trying to find ways to pay it forward to the mentors that helped me out, but also to ensure that people who come behind me don't have to kind of go through what I went through. And so really it was just opportunity being aligned with hard work. And I'm just fortunate to have been able to connect with great people along the way to kind of keep me honest and push me even at times when it got a little too difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm going to come back because I always like those stories of athletes becoming scholars. So I want to ask you a little bit more about how you made that transition. But let's go back to those definitions. I mean, when you're talking to people about diversity, inclusion, equity, how are you defining or explaining those terms to people today?
Well, in my opinion, that misconception is actually the greatest problem facing organizational development in terms of social justice work overall. I don't think it's lack of vision. I don't think it's the lack of funds, for example. I think it's the misuse of those three terms. And in short, what I try to tell people is that, diversity is difference. In other words, if I've diversified the room, I've made it look different. Whereas inclusion is an involvement. Now that I've diversified the room, I'm involving the individuals who are there. And then equity, of course, would be, in my opinion, recentering. So the idea is now that I've diversified the room, I'm now going to involve the different voices. And now I'm able to recenter the narratives of the marginalized identities that have been pushed to the back burner due to what we perceive to be normal, which tends to be a Eurocentric view of life. So for me, they're three very different things. And the biggest challenge is that organizations say they're doing equity when they have yet to do diversity. And that's what poses a little bit of a dilemma and a hindrance in the development.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That's really concise and clear. And so I'm going to come back to that because I want to ask you about the next step after that. in reference to what we do at WPC and kind of how you've thought about or are thinking about those things combining. But let's go back to being a baller, now being a scholar.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, like, has the world of athletics helped you now that you become a scholar? And how did you make the transition? When did you decide? I remember realizing, okay, Eddie, you ain't gonna make it on the ball field. And it was a kind of tough porcupine to hug, so to speak.
Yeah.
So when did you kind of make that transition? And has that world of training and balling helped you in your scholarship?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question because I think people tend to forego the connection between the two. Kobe Bryant, RIP, once said that, basketball is a teacher of life. And I couldn't agree more. I think about athletics in general and how much we use what we've learned from that into the fabric of life. We learn how to lose. We learn how to win with grace. We learn how to be respectful. We learn how to deal with adversity, whether that is matching up with someone bigger than you, dealing with the curveball that comes your way or a knuckleball, being on the green and, a little further out than you want it to be. We learn how to push through some of these things, and we learn how to take feedback from your coach or figure out what's the best way we can receive motivation. And taking that into the world of business and the world of academics goes a long way because it can become somewhat cliquey, and it's important to learn how to navigate these waters. And if you have that skill set that comes from that thick or thin that came from athletics, it really goes a long way. So that's what kind of helped shape my mindset when approaching this new world that I entered. And it was interesting for me. I came up playing basketball really my entire life, from Massachusetts. When I graduated, I was a top 10 player in the state. I was a McDonald's All-American nominee. So I had a couple of scholarships ready to go. And then my story kind of derailed. That'd be for a different conversation. I did play through college, but I did not pursue professional basketball overseas because I was undersized. I didn't have the confidence in. Leaving college, I was about 6'5", 180 maybe, 175, 180. And if I went overseas, that's the land of the 6'8" shooting guard, and I just wasn't mentally, my ego wasn't ready to come off the bench or, not get playing time. And so I tried to find a different way. And I went through different decisions, trying to figure out what direction I wanted to take my life. And like I said, once I got to graduate school, I was able to find academic language to some things I wanted to explore. And basketball was always there, but I noticed that I had a ability to connect to people in a stronger way through my words. And my last stint was when I was in North Carolina playing a little bit of semi-pro basketball. And I took the job out here in Arizona. So I left there. And truthfully, Arizona just didn't have, Tucson specifically didn't have a lot of basketball available to me. And I think my focus just shifted from there. Plus I was getting older. So.
Yeah. That wear and tear catch up to you
Right.
every now and then. Yeah. Well, I just got to ask another follow-up to that, just because as you were talking, I was reflecting and trying to myself think about all the good things that I gathered from my athletic experience that definitely, as you mentioned, help and assist and play a role in my success as a business person, an entrepreneur, educator, scholar. But I was also thinking about the things that kind of, the poisonous, the unhealthy stuff that I gathered, the macho, the patriarchy, the male dominance, the sexism, the homophobia. I'm just wondering, did you encounter some of that in that environment, and kind of how you've worked through that? Because I often, find myself thinking I'm getting better, I've done some work, but, some of that stuff is still there. So can you just talk a little bit about how you've kind of grappled with some of that, if you can relate?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd be lying. I think most guys would be lying if they said they couldn't. It's interesting for me because personally, I'm not the kind of guy who was out at parties. I'm not the kind of person who loves to be around a ton of people at a given time. I'm an introvert. So the areas of masculinity that I'm prone to toxicity the most tend to be the ones that find themselves in spaces of like a party, for example, or of a lot of people where that damage could actually be done. But I definitely did have status as an athlete, which meant I had power in a particular way. I think about President Obama, who was talking about locker room talk, and he said himself, that stuff is very real. It might not be what Trump said, but it is very real. And that's kind of the position I come from. Growing up as a product of my environment, I came up in the projects, and it was what I try to tell people. I was born in the era of Bobby Brown and New Edition. I was sort of birthed and raised in Tupac and Biggie, and I was sort of developed in 50 Cent and Ja Rule. So my later years were very much a battle of words and a war and rap with some of my favorite idols. And so you try to become that and want to be that. And a piece of that narrative is certainly womanizing and being producing a level of machismo that is at least false when it comes to who we actually are inside. And so athletics did two things. It solidified my position because it wasn't my right to really act in this toxic way. But the further I got along in athletics and the different kind of men I surrounded myself with, I was able to realize that some of these behaviors did not at all align with who I was and what I wanted to project. And it helped me dial back and begin to reconsider things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, man. And it's really helpful for me because it's one of those things I think remains a lifelong work, a lifelong project of my own. So I appreciate that. I wanted to go back because you were talking clearly, concisely about diversity, inclusion, equity, white privilege. We really try to think about that next step, which is white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. Can you talk a little bit about your ideas about how that fits into the work and your experience in working with people, organizations, universities, maybe even students around what I call CrossFit diversity, that next level, that next step?
Yeah. Another good question. I think it's nuanced. The reason why I say that is because I am a major proponent of delivering information in a way that's digestible and palpable for everybody, or as many people as possible. But what I've learned along my journey is that most organizations or institutions that I'm speaking with are not ready for that CrossFit conversation yet. And that's because they haven't had the preliminary conversation. For example, I worked with an institution or an organization a couple months ago before COVID began that was saying, hey, Sherard, we really need you because there's some racism going on here and, we need to address this racism now and so on and so forth. So what I tend to do there is, for me, starting point is always privilege, number one, of my, what I call core 5 components to social justice. And I started asking questions about privilege and folks didn't have an answer. I said, well, then you're not ready for me to talk about racism yet because it's going to go right over your head. So let's start here and move forward. So it's nuanced in that way because it's critical that we get to that point, but I need you to be able to follow me as we get there. And a lot of this is because what's normalized, as I mentioned earlier, is the Eurocentric mindset, the white supremacist belief and philosophy that has really anchored the foundations of the country. And the analogy or the comparison I try to make is, it's like going to a dentist. We find our tooth hurts, we're in pain. What do? We kind of go to the dentist, and the dentist, so you have a cavity, and they kind of fill it. Well, that filling is talking about racism. That's us having the discussion. The pain was that experience, and the filling was talking about it. So you're okay, great. I got it off my chest. I did what I had to do. We leave. We go home. That pain is still there. What the heck? Why does it still hurt? I just went to a dentist. We go back to the dentist, find out you needed a root canal, and that root canal is white supremacy. And that's the piece we don't get to often because we tend to put a filling on it and call it a night. Or some people may say we put a Band-Aid over it when we really need the antibacterial. And so that's kind of how I look at it. Problem is, when we talk about the truth of the matter, a lot of folks, if they don't have a good grasp on concepts like privilege and identity and socialization, it's almost impossible in my experience for people to understand the notion of white supremacy without getting, and white privilege without becoming really offended by it.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. Now, you had mentioned, being in Arizona, coming from Massachusetts. I'm sure you've had some other places and spaces. Can you talk a little bit about how the work there in Arizona is a little different than maybe what you came from in Massachusetts and the journey along the way?
Yeah, I think I can hit a couple places in a quick and concise way. Massachusetts, as folks may or may not know, is sort of marketed as that liberal bastion. It's the bluest of blue states, and a little bit of that's true with respect to what you have access to and what you don't. For example, I never saw a Confederate flag in my life in person while I was in New England. Forget Massachusetts, when I was in New England. But Massachusetts is one of the most racially segregated states in the country. Boston is 25% Black, but they're all over here. It's one of those experiences. I swung by Wisconsin in 2012, way up in Rhinelander, so not Green Bay, but all the way up. I didn't experience any overt racism, but I saw a Confederate flag for the first time when people were playing capture the flag with it. It just became so rooted in their day-to-day, those kinds of ideals, that they didn't even think any twice about it. Went off to Lubbock, Texas, and I noticed that there was a sort of a mammy and a sort of a one of those caricatures on the wall in some of the places I walked into. Then I went to North Carolina and I saw a Confederate flag massive on the back of a truck with pride. And so I began opening up my eyes to, this is actually real, it's on the TV. Then I come to Arizona long term, and the thing that stands out to me the most, and this may surprise folks and it may not surprise folks, is the conversation, in my opinion, has shifted from black to white, black and white to brown and white. So in other words, that racism I feel as a Black man or felt on the East Coast, even in Texas, I don't feel here in the same way. It's not that it's gone. It's just that it's not prioritized in the way that being brown, as in indigenous, native, indigenous, Chicano, Chicana, is. I've even been out places where white bouncers have come to me and belittled the Latinx individual because they had opinions about them, but they're saying it to me, the Black man, without even assuming that I would take up for my brothers and sisters of color, because that's how ingrained that dissonance seems to be. It's not everybody, but it's definitely very clear to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting, just to kind of get a landscape of the world, of the nation, especially around this work, and that's really helpful. I'm going to ask you a little bit about COVID-19 and how you're doing, how the family's doing, what's going on around you. But I was going to, before I do that, knowing that you're at the university, you're in the, young adult community, and you even have some young kids of your own and around, I'm wondering, what's your sense of the millennials, the young people? I don't know what's the age under millennial. I don't know if it's X, Y, Z, G, whatever that is, but
Right.
I'm just thinking 15 to 25.
Gotcha.
Around work that you do. What's your sense? If you had to give a grade to that group, what would you say, or an assessment? Because most people are saying the younger generation are going to bring they're going to turn it around. They're going to be the ones that change it, make it better. And I'm just wondering, what's your sense, just having some experience in that age group, in the work you do and the life you live day to day?
Yeah, we'll try to be kind here. First I can shed some light on your generational piece there. The millennials widely are regarded from 1981 to 1996. And so there's a lot more people in that group than we actually we anticipate. Those folks are 39 even today. The next generation will be Generation Z, I believe. And so this is who we're talking about now. That goes up until 2006. And so those folks, I happen to have the privilege of overseeing two of them in this house. Two of my two stepkids are 13 and 16. And so they experience some of what we're talking about. And my work personally, I don't immediately deal closely with this generation. That is actually something I'm looking to do next. But I do get a chance to experience that with these two kids. And I would say, from a peripheral view, not just them, but from their friends and looking, I would say that they are activated in ways that previous generations have not been. Um, my daughter's out there doing marches that I would have never done. I would have felt more empowered to maybe write a letter from a distance. She's out there. Little man is also vocal. He's on his football team, and they're throwing words around that are, offensive to the LGBTQ community, calling somebody a particular name when they're not tough enough. And don't say that. There's nothing wrong with being that. He's advocating on the spot. Things that I know I and my peers didn't do when we were coming up. We actually bought into maybe some of the narrative at one point in time. And so there's a different level of activation. But I will say that there is also, for some of the folks coming up, a level of an era of, I don't know if entitlement's the word, but there is the right to skip a step or two to have the problem solved. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing yet, but if you're overseeing this entire organization, Eddie, and one of these millennials is an entry-level employee, the mindset is that I should be able to go to Eddie and have my issue solved rather than my direct supervisor. And for me, that has, in my old school mindset, has been a little bit of a challenge to grip with. And I think it's good when we're talking about our passion with the work, but I think it is challenging when we're trying to change a culture that involves everybody being a part of the solution.
Yeah, that's a really enlightening point. It brings up for me, like, Google it, right? Like, I gotta ask him, the immediate boss, when I can go to the supreme boss, so to speak.
Right.
What's interesting is I found that even people who are doing the consulting work that we do, I mean, they almost want to read a book and say, I'm ready for a keynote, so to speak. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting. I appreciate that. That has me thinking, and it really gives some good insight. I was going to ask you, how y'all doing, man? COVID-19, quarantine. I know Arizona was a little late to the party, but by and large, how are you doing? How are y'all doing? And then do you get a sense of how the larger community is doing around COVID-19, quarantine, protests? I mean, there's just so much happening right now.
There's a ton happening, man. We're doing well. Thank you for asking that. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but we actually have a baby on the way in August, which is super exciting.
Leo, I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, it's exciting for us.
Bro.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Like I said, I'm privileged to have 2 stepkids, but this is my first bio child, so I'm excited to go through the process with my wife and really dig into this. Hashtag dad prep, as I've been talking about. Bought a grill, bought some other stuff already. But so COVID's been a little bit of an interesting approach because this isn't really how we wanted to spend the pregnancy. Want to be out there amongst friends and get some fresh air minimally. So we've had to make an adjustment there. We're hoping that it's dialed back by the time the baby gets here, but we'll make adjustments as necessary. As far as the community goes, the mayor has shut down the city until today, actually, and is requesting another 14-day extension. But we'll see what Governor Ducey, who oversees the state, does. We're not quite sure. I will say that the University of Arizona, which a lot of us work at and work with, instituted a furlough, which isn't something that other institutions haven't done, but it's the most notable one, I would say, in the country. The president of the university was just on CNN not too long ago, for example. I believe it was CNN not too long ago. I've had people reach out to me from across the country saying, hey, what's going on with U of A and their furlough process? And so just the amount that they cut and their decisions to lump certain groups together when it came to making this decision has been very problematic for a lot of people, and it seems to take the most stress on folks, faculty and staff of color and graduate students. So there's petitions that have gone out, there's been a lot of movement, letters have gone out on how to address this. And so from a community standpoint, at least the academic side of the house, it's been worrisome. People trying to make sure that they can still feed their families as we get going. But the general population that I've come across seems to be a little less bothered. Tucson is a outdoorsy city, so I think for people it doesn't get as much in the way of their day-to-day, since you're just going to the mountains anyway, as it would a New York City or a Boston or Atlanta.
Yeah, thank you for that. Bro, can you just tell the people, because I think we're going to be hearing this word furlough and reading this word furlough for young people. I mean, what is that? What is a furlough?
A furlough is sort of an organizational compromise to not lay people off or get rid of people's jobs, but to cut back their pay in such a way that we can keep you employed during your time here, but we have to minimize how much we're paying you in order to make it sustainable. And so if your salary was X amount, maybe you get a 15% cut or a 20% cut, which is great on your gross and net pay, but it keeps you employed. And so that's where the negotiation is for a lot of people.
Right. And so the CEO takes a furlough, the president, yeah, I mean, all levels. I mean, I'm just wondering, not to ask you to answer that question, but I've been reading, people are feeling like the people at the top of the organization of the corporation is not hasn't even taken a cut or reduced pay. Yeah. And yet, so that's really helpful to really give people some sense of what furlough means, because I think people are hearing that word right now, and I'll be hearing it more and more possibly. Right. And it's really good that we can give folks some insight to that. All right. Well, as we get ready to head down, closing this up, tell me about the next 10 years. What's on the horizon? We got Daddy Prep, of course. But when you think about your career, your aspirations, what's on the horizon for the next 10 years?
Good question. Oh man, at this point, I'm wrapping up the PhD. I should have that by December, if all goes the way it's going. And that's going to be in education with a focus on educational leadership and policy with a focus on organizational development. And next year, by the summer, I should also have a law degree as well. So those are the two things I'm trying to check off the books. I want to expand visceral change in a way that gives us a little bit more recognition and acclaim. And so I published a book in January and trying to make sure I can keep connections going to make that happen. But I guess it's the first time going on record with it. I actually would love to run for office at some point in time, maybe at the mayoral level or move up from there. So just trying to set up the chessboard, so to speak, to make sure I have the pieces in place to see what I can do there.
Yeah. Now, you had said something about you published a book or you're preparing a book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. I published a book and dropped it back in January called A Diamond is a Diamond, the Core 5 Components of Social Justice. And it really just highlights how I kind of govern my consultancy. I believe that social justice is a movement comprised of these 5 components: power and privilege, identity and intersectionality, systems of socialization, cultural competence, and allyship and advocacy. And the book it's in 2 parts. And the first part goes through what those 5 are and how you can incorporate them to your day-to-day. Second half talks about how you can put them into your workforce and the job functions. And so I'll be delivering a TED Talk in September at TEDx Tucson, which kind of digs a little bit more into the organizational side of things. And so hopefully that allows people to fill in some of the gaps that may not have been there in the book.
Yeah. So when you look at the landscape of the nation, I mean, I feel like COVID-19, the pandemic has really given us an opportunity to stop.
Right. Yeah.
Hammer time, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? So as you stop, what has this reflection on yourself during this time told you about you? Because I know you're an introspective brother, right? But also when you think about the nation, the world we're living in, as you're bringing in a child, you got 2 young kids. I mean, as we actually had to stop and kind of look at the nation, the world, what's that told you? What's that telling you? What's your sense of where we are as a nation as well?
I think it's twofold. I think on one hand, we are far more resilient than I thought. Just to kind of hit the pause button on a dime, you would think would be a silly notion. But it seems like the world has adopted that principle pretty reasonably. I notice a difference day in and day out when I walk outside. For example, And in a country like the United States that really functions on uh, uh, social interactions and big city, big business, um, it's remarkable how that adjustment was able to be made. But then on the other hand, it's also telling of the leadership that we have at the very top and what that means for the constituents of the country. And so there's been a lot of pushback to President Trump that makes sense to me based on some of the rhetoric we're hearing. But at the same time, it's difficult to understand how some people are not seeing some of the problems with the statements that are being made and some of the challenges that come with the claims that we've heard recently, whether it's the new solutions to COVID, uh, safety measures, or the idea of reopening too early, and then you get protests outside as a result of that. It's just confusing to see how, on one hand, there's a lot of this hope and strength that comes with the country and some of the fabric of it, and then there's this challenge that intersects that says, well, maybe we're not as unified on this position as we thought. And I'm not saying it's easy to hit the pause button. I'm not saying it's easy to, or simple even, to be able to not go outside or do what you wanted to do. But what I'm saying is, when we start considering the fact that the best way to resolve this at this point in time is to at least distance, then I would hope that in the name of reason, folks wouldn't deliberately go against that particular narrative. And it hits me a little bit differently. My dad actually got COVID not too long ago. He beat it, if you will. It's probably an appropriate term to use at this point in time. So I understand the importance of distancing and the dangers that can come with it. So I just hope that we can tap into the lighter side of things on our end, which is the strength, and get past some of the issues that are plaguing individuals, causing them to react in a certain way.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. Well, I didn't know I could add another title to your name, but I'm gonna be ambitious, forward thinking to do so.
Okay.
So, but before I close out with the titles I have in store for you, I want to ask you some questions on a lighter note.
Okay.
All right. We've been asking people, what have you been watching, streaming, listening to, or reading? Are there any recommendations you would give to folks in reference to a binge that you've checked out, or something you're reading or listening to, as we try to build a little, while you're in quarantine, here's some things you can do? Yes.
I mean, well, as far as music, you know me, man. We can, I've switched it up a little bit. I'm out here doing my old school Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis type stuff. So I always recommend the old standards if people are trying to mellow out a little bit, find a way through something, find a way to keep the light on in the relationship, find a way to be romantic and still have date night. That's one way to put some Frank on, put some Dean, some Nat on, and call it a night. As far as binging goes, I don't know if we've watched anything that other folks haven't. We're big fans of The Voice. We kind of catch it on Hulu though, so we catch it the next day. But then we watched The Tiger King, ran through that. We watched McMillions, which was actually a pretty good one. There was another one that looked at sort of a drug investigation in Massachusetts. So kind of binging some of the big name ones. But I would say the nightly shows for us are always The Office until it goes off on January 21st. There's a new Michael Jordan documentary that's on every weekend. And my wife watches her other shows that we don't really watch. But we have been watching Mrs. America, though, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's helpful, man. That's helpful. Now, I know you are a karaoke king. Now, I am not one to be sharing my karaoke skill set.
Okay.
Publicly.
Sure.
But for you, I'm willing to do that. If you can drop a bar, a couple lines from, what I'm wondering is, what's your go-to karaoke? If you are there and you got a battle, and you got to win, and there's a song that you're gonna hit every note, what's your go-to karaoke? And can you give me a 3 or 4 lines? And if you will, I'll give you my go-to 3 or 4 lines.
That's a cool question. I've actually thought about that. I've been in competitions in the past and I've done different types of songs, but if I were to audition for a show, and I mean, Fly Me to the Moon is one I feel confident in. There's maybe an Elvis track here and there. There's a few different ones, but maybe Fly Me to the Moon, probably the most notable one that people know, that I feel most comfortable with. So you want to hear that?
I'm just saying, can we get 3 or 4? If you want 3 or 4 lines out of me, you got to go first. That's all I'm saying.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. I don't want to belt and wake folks up. Maybe I'll find something more subtle.
Well, you can be low. I mean, you say.
You know what I mean? Let me see. I tend to belt.
I feel you.
Let's see. How about we do? Let's do. Let's do it. It goes. Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. In other words, hold my hand. In other words, baby, kiss me.
My goodness. Now, see, here's my problem. Here's my concern, I should say. I'm in the contest with you, and I'm definitely not going to win on lyrical skill. I can tell you that right now. You're going to, and without a doubt, take it on the lyrical ability. So I got to add a little, entertainment value. I got to use my athletic skills.
Let's hear it.
So my go-to is the Oak Ridge Boys.
Okay.
Elvira, I don't know if you know this. I'll share this with you. But my karaoke name is Black Country.
I love it, man.
So here's my version, a little bit of Elvira. I know my family's in the background. They might get in there and ready to jump in and sing. If
I'm ready for it.
Hear me up in here, you know what I'm saying? So here we go. Eyes that look like heaven. Lips like cherry wine.
Hey.
That girl can sure enough make my little light shine. I get a funky feeling up and down my spine.
Hey.
As long as I know that my Elvira's mine. All right, now let's go, y'all. All right.
Yes, sir.
So, I can't wait till I know we've been close to the karaoke.
We got to make it happen, though.
We got to make it happen, man. That's going to be something we got to make happen. I look forward to just working all day and just spend a little time with you, just chilling out and having some fun at the karaoke machine.
I need it, man. I need it.
In the future.
Yes.
Listen, man, I appreciate you joining us. Dare I say, Counselor Sherard Robbins, Dr. Sherard Robbins. Now I can add Mayor, Governor, Representative.
We'll see.
Senator. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present the President of the United States. Man, listen, thank you, man. Good luck to you. Congratulations on the new baby. Give my best to the wife and family. Of course. And let's stay in touch, man. I'm sending you some virtual Wakanda hug, man. Much love to you, man. Thanks for coming at us, man. Appreciate
it, Eddie. Thank you, man. Thanks so much. All right, baby.
All right, man. Peace.
Peace.